Okay, I want to welcome everybody here and thank you. I really want to take a minute to welcome Senator Cornyn and thank you for coming down here. Wish more from your area would come down here and see what we're dealing with here. We had the opportunity to go through, tour the facility that's just south of here a ways. I want everybody to rest assured these kids are being taken care of, and they're being taken care of in an awesome facility. Well, what's real amazing is the people that are there to take care of them. From the outside, trying to get answers, it's tough. We're dealing with federal bureaucrats, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's what we're dealing with. But once you get inside and you deal with the human beings that are there to take care of these kids, they're very candid, they're very open, they're very informative. They answered every question. They didn't hold back on anything. Again, these kids are very well taken care of. No money is spared for what they need, whether it be health, food, housing, any of that, their clothes, everything. One little tidbit I would like to share that I learned while I was inside, and they kept referring to reunification, and in some of the talks they would bring that word up again, and we'd move on, they'd bring it up again, and I asked point blank, if you're going to reunify these children, why don't you take them back to Guatemala and reunify with their parents? And I didn't mean that in a hateful way, but to me that's what reunification is, and the majority of these kids in this facility are from Guatemala. And the answer was, the majority of these kids, their families are already here, their mom and dad's already in the United States, has been a while. That was a shock. These kids are coming to be rejoined to their mom and dad. So that takes on a whole new sense for me, for these folks. So anyway, I just want to leave with that, and I want to introduce Mayor Payton and let him tell you his impressions of what he saw out there.
Thanks, Judge. Pleasure with you. Again, I want to thank Senator Cornyn for being here as well. This is my second time out at the facility, and I'll keep my comments brief and save time for your questions. The most important thing that we've been talking about ever since this whole thing erupted here in Midland, beyond all the not knowing what's going to happen, is you're really talking about two issues. You're talking about chaos and you're talking about care. The chaos is at the border. I don't think anybody's denying that. Anybody who's trying to deny that is just not seeing what's happening. I'm not even sure the Democrats who are in charge really realized the chaos they were going to unleash. And the fact of the matter is their willingness to unleash the chaos is really not because they have a plan, but just because, quite frankly, they hated anything that was successful that President Trump did and that his administration enacted. So after all that's being said, and then you get in the facility, as Judge Johnson just talked about, these kids, you can't help but just walk around and look in their eyes and look in their faces and realize this is the best they've had it. This is the best hope they've had. This is the best chance that they have had. And our questions have been answered. Every question we've had, even the hard question where I asked some of the people who are working there, can you debunk for me the idea that some of these kids are being trafficked either with labor or sexually? And every one of them says, we can't debunk that. At the same time, we also know these kids show up with a birth certificate in hand. We've heard stories of reunifications taking just outside the gates as parents have driven down here and found their kids, and all the other kids in the facility cheering and shouting because one of their cohort, as they call them down here, found their family and get to go off and pursue the American dream and hopefully pursue that legally in all the ways that we should. I'm incredibly proud of our communities of Midland and Odessa who have consistently said, how can we help? Because I think our communities and West Texans understand chaos doesn't mean that we don't take the responsibility of care. And we have told people at the facility, please let us know how we can help. I know some people think that they're trying to keep us out, but the fact of the matter is we don't get that sense. I don't think the judge gets that sense at all, that they're trying to keep us out. They're trying to do their job. These kids have a schedule they follow every day. They're up at 7 or 7:30 in the morning. They go through activities. When we left, they were in martial arts class, and that was kind of interesting. They play a lot of, well, they call it football. We call it soccer. We told them if you're going to be in West Texas, you might start to try to teach them football, the real football, but we'll see how that goes. But the reality is, we're doing the right thing while the wrong thing is being done at the border. That's just the fact. It's just chaos because of executive order. It's disorder because of executive order. But the right thing here is being done to these kids and for these kids. I hope in other places it's being done as well. We keep doing what we're supposed to do, and hopefully we'll get the issues fixed with our colleagues like Senator Cornyn at the federal level once people realize that just because you want to dismantle something because you dislike someone doesn't mean that something you get in return is actually what should be good for the country and good for people. So with that being said, I want to thank again Senator Cornyn for being here. Turn it over to him, and then we'll get ready for questions.
Well, thanks, Mayor and Judge. It's good to be back in the Permian Basin. This is I want to say my fourth or fifth migrant detention facility that I visited. I was down in Carrizo Springs a couple of weeks ago with Henry Cuellar, Democrat from Laredo, and then visited with stakeholders down in that region, these border communities that have been overrun by the sea of humanity that we're seeing. Went down to the Donna facility with my colleagues from the Senate. Senator Cruz and I invited, I think it was 17 of our colleagues to go with us to the border so they could learn like we've learned from the experts. And when I say that, it's the Border Patrol, it's the professionals who are dealing with this policy, not of their making, but they don't have any choice but to deal with it, just like the good people that you heard about here in Midland. And what they tell us is that there are push factors and there are pull factors. Now, the push factors we would all understand. Poverty, violence, wanting a better life. We all understand that. And the fact is, I think if you ask most people would want to come to the United States, particularly if their conditions where they live are not good. But the fact is, we can't handle this in a chaotic and extra legal or outside legal immigration system, and that's exactly what's happening now. I agree with the description. The Biden administration reversed the previous administration's policy for no other reason than it was President Trump who had ordered it, without giving a thought to what would happen, what would they unleash, what would be the consequence. So the push factors are the violence, poverty, and a desire for a better life, and again, we all understand that as human beings. But the pull factors are things like putting out the welcome mat for anybody and everybody who wants to come to the United States, not imposing consequences for illegally immigrating to the United States, and dealing with human smugglers who are getting rich, transporting their human cargo from Central America, from Mexico into the United States, charging thousands of dollars a head. This is a money-making proposition for them. And they'll continue to do it as long as we let them and do not impose consequences. Part of the problem you've probably heard is the asylum claims. And this is a special category of immigration law, but they make the claim at the border, but then because of the backlog in immigration cases, 1.2 million cases backlog in immigration court, they are released with a notice to reappear. They call it a permiso, but it's a notice to reappear in court months, maybe even years in the future. And guess what? Most of them don't show up because they realize they may get denied their asylum claim and they may be returned to their country of origin. So they just simply melt into the great American landscape. So those are the pull factors, along with the push factors, that create this situation we see right now, which is going to get nothing but worse. One of the things the Border Patrol has told me, that you cannot build enough of these facilities to stay ahead of the number of people that are going to come. And if you think about it, as I've tried to describe it to you, you can see why. People are just going to continue to come until they realize that they're not going to be successful. They will be returned to their country of origin. They will have to get in line like everybody else who wants to legally immigrate to the United States rather than jump to the head of the line. In the meantime, I agree with the mayor and the judge. It's our responsibility to take care of these young people. But the fact of the matter is, this is a strategy on the part of the human smugglers, the criminal organizations that traffic in migrants, they traffic in illegal drugs, like the drugs that have killed 80,000 Americans last year alone because of drug overdoses alone. Heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and the like. And one reason they also send these children unaccompanied to the border is because the Border Patrol will take care of them. That's their job. We want them to treat them compassionately. But in the meantime, they're changing diapers and making sure they're fed. They're off at the front line, and guess what happens? Well, when you have a hole in your front line playing football, the opposition runs right through it. And that's exactly what's happening here. And so the drug smugglers that are in combination with these criminal organizations smuggling people will take advantage of that and move those drugs to great profit here in the United States. This is a humanitarian crisis. It's a public health crisis, and it's got to stop. People like the good folks in the Permian Basin are having to pay the price. The taxpayers are paying about $1,000 a day in order to house and feed and take care of these young people. And I know we want to take care of them, but we also recognize the unfairness about imposing those costs on taxpayers because of broken policy in Washington, D.C. Finally, let me just say, the only way you solve problems in Washington, D.C. is in a bipartisan way. And so I introduced legislation in 2017, going to reintroduce it here in the coming days with Henry Cuellar and with Senator Sinema from Arizona, a Democrat from Arizona. We need to find some way to find common ground to fix this, or at least mitigate this sea of humanity coming across our border, along with all the human misery associated with it. If you think it's a walk in the park to come from Central America up through Mexico into the United States, you'd be mistaken. Border Patrol tells us about 1/3 of the girls and women are sexually and otherwise assaulted. We saw yesterday where the coyotes who were bringing people across the Rio Grande River threw a 6-month-old child into the water because they knew that the Border Patrol would rescue that child. In the meantime, they would be distracted and they'd be able to get into the interior. This is unsustainable, it's intolerable, and it's got to be fixed. But what we need are the right policies coming out of Washington, D.C. to restore a legal immigration system. And I'll close on this. Legal immigration has made our country the greatest country in the world. Legal immigration. Because we've benefited from the people who work hard, who are ambitious, who are willing to get outside their comfort zone to come to the United States, but to do it the right way. And unfortunately, the illegal immigration is a recipe for the chaos we've talked about here, but it also dishonors those immigrants who apply for legal immigration and do it the right way. So we've got to restore some order out of that chaos for everybody's benefit. I'm happy to answer a few questions. We've got the experts here on my right and left. If you got any hard questions, they'll take those. Yes, sir.
Senator Cornyn, why not increase manpower in the Border Patrol? Why not increase the drones and balloon technology on the border and start recruiting more people, and so you don't have the situation where you have someone on the other side throwing a little baby into the water to distract?
Yeah. The Border Patrol told me as recently as when we had a number of our colleagues down there that it's a matter of PTI, personnel, Border Patrol, technology, and infrastructure. President Trump liked to talk about the wall. Some people call it a fence. Others call it a physical barrier. But we need some physical barriers in hard to control places, because when there's no physical barrier there, it can funnel the migrants through those vulnerable locations, and they are very successful. But I think we also need to have some, in addition to those three things, I think we need the right policy. We need to reform our asylum laws and to make sure that we push these cases to the head of the line while they're still being processed, so that the ones who qualify, roughly 10% of the asylum claims are validated by an immigration judge, but the rest that don't legally qualify, they need to be returned to their country of origin under American law. So it's going to take PTI, but it's also going to take the right policies in place, and that's frankly the responsibility of Congress and the President.
So no money? I mean, are you going to provide any funding for to bring in to recruit?
Well, it all costs money. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. But what we're seeing now costs money too. All of this has financial consequences. Yes, sir.
Since you mentioned CBP is having a hard time, building enough structures to house
Right.
migrants. I'm curious, from a logistical perspective, does it make sense to use man camps that may be more vacant after 2020's oil downturn as these kind of facilities like we're seeing in Midland and like we're seeing in Pecos?
Well, one thing I've talked to the judge and the mayor about is I think it's completely unacceptable for the federal government to surprise local elected officials and communities by all of a sudden plopping one of these facilities down without consultation and communication. But having said that, as you've heard from them, we think it's our responsibility to take care of these kids while they're here. But this is a product of the system being overwhelmed, and they're scrambling as fast as they can, trying to find new places. Most recently, San Antonio, at Lackland Air Force Base, I think out at Fort Bliss, in El Paso. They're looking for anywhere and everywhere they can keep these children until they're processed. And I would say one of the bizarre things about this situation is they pay thousands of dollars to get them to the border, but once they get to the border, then it's the United States government and the taxpayer that actually places them with their family member and finishes the job that the smugglers started, which seems to me to be very strange, a strange policy and a strange practice. So we got to stop we got to turn the spigot off rather than just deal with the continual flood of humanity, like I said.
You said this is the fourth or fifth facility that you visited. How does this facility compare to the other migrant facilities you've been to?
It's very similar. It's not a five-star hotel, but it's clean, and they're well taken care of. And the other thing that makes this different is the pandemic, and they're trying to manage that the best way they can. But there are people coming across that are not tested for COVID-19. Mexico just recently upped the number of COVID-19 deaths that they reported, and there's reports because of being overwhelming the personnel and resources that they're actually releasing people who test positive, and they're told, hey, by the way, when you get to where you're going, quarantine in place for 10 days. Well, give me a break. I just don't believe that's going to happen. So that is another complicating layer on top of this. But right here, right now, these young men are being well taken care of.
Got time for one more question? Senator, what do you think personally would be a solution to this?
Well, back during the Bush 43 administration, we had an influx of Brazilians. And what we've learned from that experience is if you release people, then they're going to keep coming. If you detain them and give them their day in court, then you will return those who don't legally qualify for some immigration benefit, and it will discourage others from coming. So we can't just have use another football analogy. Border security isn't a goal line stand every time. We need to play the entire field. We need to try to work with our allies like Mexico, like President Trump did. Actually, he was very successful getting Mexico to agree to the Migrant Protection Program, the Remain in Mexico policy, where 25,000 asylum seekers were until the Biden administration said, all bets are off, come on in. And again, this sends the signal to the smugglers who are getting rich. This sends signals to the drug traffickers. This sends signals to the migrants that, sure, come on in. We got a big welcome mat here. And obviously that's the way things are working is not working in anybody's interest, certainly not the American taxpayer's interest, certainly not in the interest of public safety and public health and national security. But we need to fix it, and fixing it by ending catch and release.
Thanks, y'all. Can we get a photo of the